I refused to share a room with a 1-year-old, twin 2-year-olds, and a 4-year-old. I was 18 when my Aunt Carla invited me and my friend Beth to her ranch house for 4th of July. Now, this place was huge. 4 bedrooms with queen beds, a master bedroom, and this massive kids' room with about 6 beds and a loft. I was pumped to finally get away from the city and run around on their land with Beth. When we got there, I found out the sleeping situation. Me and Beth were supposed to bunk with 4 screaming kids while their parents got their own room. My cousin Ryan, who's 16, also got his own space with our other relatives. But us, nope. We got babysitting duty. The kids belonged to my Aunt Julie and Uncle Mark. These people had 4 kids under 5, and none of them slept through the night. I knew this because I'd stayed at their house once before, and it was pure hell. The baby would cry, wake up the twins, who would then wake up the 4-year-old, and it was just chaos all night long. I told Aunt Carla we'd rather sleep on the couch. That's when things got ugly. Aunt Julie completely lost it. She started screaming about how we got to bring a friend so we should watch her kids. She said someone needed to be responsible for them during the night. And since Ryan was a growing boy who doesn't know how to take care of kids, it had to be us. The way she said it, like we were hired help or something, made my blood boil. Nobody else wanted to get involved. Aunt Carla just shrugged and said we needed to figure it out ourselves. So, I ignored Julie and started setting up blankets on the couch with Beth. That's when Julie really snapped. She marched over and threw all our stuff off the couches onto the floor. She got right in my face and said we had to sleep with her kids or we couldn't stay at all. Beth was standing there looking mortified because this crazy woman was screaming at us over sleeping arrangements. I told Julie we were leaving if we couldn't sleep on the couch. She started screaming even louder about how I drove up with my dad's boat and if I left, nobody could pull it around the property. Like that was somehow my problem. The whole family just stood there watching this woman have a complete meltdown over us not wanting to be unpaid babysitters. My cousin Ryan was smirking like this was entertainment. Aunt Carla kept saying just work it out instead of telling her sister to calm down. I'd had enough. I went outside and started loading our stuff back into my truck. Julie followed me out there still yelling about how I was being selfish and that she needed a break from her kids. She actually said I should be grateful for the chance to help family. Beth was standing by the truck looking like she wanted to disappear. This wasn't exactly the fun weekend getaway I'd promised her. I could see other relatives peeking out the windows watching the drama unfold. I hitched the boat trailer back up while Julie kept ranting. She was going on about how young people today don't respect their elders, and how I was setting a bad example. Then she tried a different approach and started crying about how overwhelmed she was with 4 kids and how she just needed one night of good sleep. I almost felt bad for a second until I remembered she'd thrown our stuff on the floor and screamed at my friend. I told her that wasn't my problem and got in the truck. Julie actually tried to block us from leaving by standing behind the trailer. Uncle Mark finally came outside and pulled his wife away from our truck. He looked embarrassed but didn't apologize or anything, just told Julie to come inside and let us go. We drove the 3 hours back home in silence. Beth finally said she was sorry the trip got ruined and that my family was intense. I was so embarrassed I could barely look at her. But she just laughed it off and said at least now she had a story to tell for the rest of her life. When we got home, my dad was in the driveway wiping down the grill, and he froze when he saw us pull in way earlier than planned. He walked over, glanced at the empty back seat, then at my face, then at Beth's, and immediately went, "What happened?" I tried to summarize it calmly, but the second I mentioned Aunt Julie screaming at Beth and throwing our stuff, my dad's jaw tightened so hard I thought he was going to crack a tooth. He made us go inside, handed Beth a soda, and told me to start from the beginning. I told him everything, including how Julie said we had to watch her kids while the adults slept comfortably in their own rooms. When I got to the part about her blocking the trailer, my dad slammed his hand on the counter loud enough that Beth jumped. He grabbed his keys and said, "I'm going to go have a conversation with your aunt." And I swear the floor vibrated when he walked out. Mom had to call him and tell him not to drive 3 hours just to yell at people who clearly had no shame. Meanwhile, my phone started blowing up. Missed calls, texts, group chat notifications. Aunt Julie had apparently told everyone in the family that I abandoned her children in the middle of a crisis and disrespected her home. She conveniently left out the part where she tried to force 2 teenagers to be overnight nannies for sleep-parking toddlers. The best part, Ryan texted me a whole paragraph saying I was dramatic and sleeping with kids isn't a big deal. I replied, "Cool. So I'll volunteer next time." He left me on read. But things really exploded the next morning when Aunt Carla called my mom. Not me, my mom. Carla said she couldn't believe I ruined the holiday and embarrassed the family by leaving. My mom said, very calmly, "So you're telling me you let Julie scream at my daughter throw her belongings, and treat her like childcare she didn't agree to. And you think she's a problem? Carla went silent. Mom continued, if you ever invite my kids somewhere and let your sister treat her like that again, don't expect her to come back. And don't invite her unless you plan to act like a host instead of a bystander. Carla tried to defend Julie, saying she was overwhelmed and stressed, and my mom said, then she should hire a babysitter instead of bullying teenagers. After that call, the group chat went nuclear. Half the family said Julie was out of line. The other half said, family helps family, and I should have sacrificed one night of sleep for the sake of the little kids. The funniest message came from Uncle Mark, who sent me a private text saying, sorry about what happened. Julie was emotional. She was acting like someone flipped the wrong switch on a malfunctioning robot. I didn't bother replying. A day later, Beth's mom called mine and thanked her for picking us up early. Apparently Beth had told her everything, and her mom said, if some woman had screamed at my daughter like that, I would have driven out there myself. Beth's mom also said, and I quote, if that's their idea of hospitality, I hope they never invite her again. The more time passed, the more the embarrassment morphed into irritation. I kept replaying Julie's words, you should be grateful for the chance to help family. Grateful for being shoved into a room with screaming toddlers like we were spare babysitters? Grateful for being yelled at? Grateful for having our things thrown on the floor? 2 days later, Julie sent me a long Facebook message pretending to be the bigger person. The kind of message that starts with I forgive you even though they're the one who caused the problem. She said she hoped I'd reflect on my selfishness and understand the importance of supporting a struggling mother. She even wrote, you ruined the holiday, but I'm willing to move past it for the sake of family unity. I didn't respond. I didn't even open it. I just screenshot it and sent it to Beth, who laughed so hard she said her stomach hurt. A week later, the family group chat went quiet except for Carla sending Bible quotes about forgiveness. Nobody addressed the real issue at all. Nobody said Julie needed to apologize for screaming at teenagers who didn't owe her a single minute of childcare. Nobody asked if we were okay. But the next time I saw my dad hooking the boat up for a different trip, he said, no more ranch visits. You're not going back there unless someone grows a backbone, honestly? Best decision ever. Beth agrees. We still talk about that disaster trip and laugh. But one thing is for sure, if anyone ever invites me somewhere and tries to stick me in a room with 4 under 5-year-olds again, I'm turning around the second I see a diaper. No hesitation. Story to what do you do when the world tells you you're worthless and then hands you the key to everything? My name is Mark Sullivan, 64 years old, a son, a veteran. A man who spent his life doing the right thing with little to show for it in the end. Or so I thought. The day my father's will was read, the air in the lawyer's oak-paneled office felt colder than the upstate New York winter outside. I sat on one side of the long table, with nothing but my father's old compass in my pocket, a dented brass relic he'd given me when I left for Vietnam. Always know which way home is, he'd said. Across from me sat Adam, my younger brother, 11 years apart and miles different in every way he came. Dressed in a designer coat, his sunglasses still perched atop his head, as if the room itself wasn't worthy of dimming his shine. He didn't look at me once. Ms. Rosario, our lawyer since childhood, unfolded the will with a weariness that mirrored my own. The Sullivan family home in Kingston, New York, valued at $800,000, is to be inherited by Adam Sullivan? Adam didn't smile, but his eyes gleamed. It was the same house where Mom planted her first garden, where Dad taught me how to use a hammer. The house where I slept on the couch for 3 months while caring for them during their final days. I squeezed the compass in my hand. The lid flipped open, and for the first time in years, I noticed that the needle didn't point north anymore. Broken. Just like everything else, Miss Rosario continued. To our eldest son, Mark Sullivan, we leave the property located in Anchorage, Alaska, the cabin, the land, and everything contained within. Adam let out a quiet laugh. A shack in a patch of frozen dirt 7,500 miles from civilization. Congrats, big bro. I didn't respond, but a memory flashed. Flashback, 1970. Dad and I stood in the garage. A storm raged outside. He pressed the compass into my palm. Your brother's going to choose the easy path. Dad said he's smart and ambitious, but he forgets what matters. You're the one who stays. When the world falls apart, you don't run. That's why I trust you. I never understood those words. Not then, not until now. That night, I returned to the house I'd shared with Claire, my fiancée of nearly 13 years. She was there when I had nothing, supported me when I came back from war. Quieter, but still me. We ate dinner in silence. Finally, she asked, so, what did they leave? I told her the truth. Told her I got a cabin, and nothing more. She set her fork down. Not gently. Mark, I thought this would change things. I thought maybe we could finally move forward. But this, she shook her head. You will never amount to anything. Do you understand that? Not now, not ever. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She walked upstairs, packed a bag, and by morning, she was gone. One question before we dive in. Have you ever been ignored by the very people you loved most? Comment yes if you felt that. I read every reply, and this story is for us. I sat alone in the kitchen. The compass still in my hand, the needle just barely shifted. It didn't point north, but it flickered as if remembering something. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' old garage. The workbench was still there. I found one final note taped beneath it, written in my father's unmistakable printing. If you're reading this, you're not done yet. It's time to go north. I called Ms. Rosario from the car. How do I get to that cabin? 3 days later, I landed in Anchorage. The air burned with cold clarity I hadn't felt in decades. From there I drove north, past rivers trapped in ice, forests stripped bare by winter, and mountains that looked like silent judges. When I reached the cabin, I stood for a long moment, letting the wind howl. The structure leaned into the earth as though it were trying to return itself to silence. The front door was locked with an old iron key hanging from a nail beneath the eaves. I turned it slowly. The compass flickered in my hand, and when the door opened, everything I thought I knew about my family and myself would change forever. The door creaked open, the old hinges groaning like a man waking from a decades long sleep. What lay before me wasn't a home, not in any traditional sense. The cabin was barren, skeletal, dust coated every surface. Wind whispered through gaps in the wood like a sorrowful memory that never quite left. My breath fogged in the cold as I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. At first, I thought the cabin was empty. Then I saw it. A strange symbol carved into the wall near the fireplace, half hidden under a layer of soot. Two intersecting lines with a circle crossing their center. It looked almost tribal or perhaps military. I ran my fingers over the carving, a splinter caught in the skin of my thumb. Sharp, sudden. I sucked in air. Something else glinted beneath the hearthstones. A flash of metal. I crouched down and shifted a loose stone aside. A key? Brass, old, heavy, shaped like something out of another century. But there was something else, wrapped around its handle. A ribbon, faded blue, frayed at both ends. My mother's favorite color. A sound echoed in my ears. Her voice. Flashback, a summer 1981. Mom and I were sitting on the back porch. The hydrangeas in full bloom. You've always been the careful one, Mark, she said as she wrapped a blue ribbon around her wrist. The same shade as the sky that day. You're not the type to chase things. You wait until what's real comes to you. Maybe that's why you'll inherit something different one day. Something meant only for you. She smiled, mysterious. Knowing that memory hit me like a blast of cold air. This key wasn't meant for Adam. It wasn't meant for anyone else. I stood. Something tugged at my attention. A discolored outline on the wall near the back of the room. A square panel subtly recessed, covered by years of neglect. I rubbed at it, scraping away soot and dirt. Underneath was a barely visible seam, a hidden door. My pulse quickened. I tried prying it open with my hands. It wouldn't budge. But the key in my palm suddenly felt heavier. I inserted it into a subtle keyhole I hadn't noticed before. It turned with a satisfying click. The panel swung inward, releasing a stale rush of air. Air that felt untouched for decades. Behind it was a narrow passageway descending into darkness. I grabbed the lantern from the wall, lit it with trembling fingers, and stepped inside. Stairs descended deeper than I expected. Cold stone instead of timbers. Whoever built this place knew how to hide things well. At the bottom was a steel vault door, old but intact, no lock mechanism visible. Just one word stangled across its surface, legacy. I stared at the word for a long moment, then reached out and pressed my hand against the metal. There was a soft click. The door swung open. Inside was a room unlike anything I imagined. Shelves lined with sealed metal crates stamped with foreign seals. Bundles of old banknotes, photographs, maps, and on a single wooden desk at the center, a leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope addressed to me. To my son Mark, if you're reading this, you've finally come home. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter. My father's handwriting. You were always the one who listened. The world saw weakness. I saw strength. It takes more courage to stand still than to run. More honor to hold quiet truth than to chase loud lies. What you found here is not just wealth, but witness these assets were stolen, misused, lost in the fog of war. I spent my life making sure they landed here, not in the wrong hands. I left you the cabin not to punish you, but because I needed someone who wouldn't see gold, only power, and choose to do something better. At the bottom was a final line written smaller, almost shaky. Don't let them take this in the dark. Bring it into the light. I stood in silence, the weight of history heavy in my hands. My father hadn't failed me. He trusted me with something bigger than inheritance. He trusted me with truth. Then I heard it. The crunch of snow. Footsteps. Someone or something was outside. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows against the walls of the vault. I blew it out and stepped into the darkness, ready for whatever came next. The cabin groaned as the storm outside swelled, the wind howling against the wooden beams like a warning. I stood still in the darkness of the hidden vault, peering up toward the stairs. The footsteps came again, slow, cautious, not the hurried shuffle of someone lost or panicked. This was someone who knew exactly where they were going. I moved silently across the stone floor, feeling the weight of the key in my palm. The letter burned in my pocket like a living thing. The stairs creaked. Then came a voice, calm, low, and firm. "Mr. Sullivan, we need to talk." I froze. The voice wasn't familiar, but the tone. The authority was. I climbed the steps quietly, pushing the hidden wall panel shut behind me, locking the vault away once more. My breath fogged the air as I grabbed a rusted poker from the fireplace and held it low. When I reached the front door, the intruder wasn't trying to get in. He stood in the frame, illuminated by the pale gray light of the stormtall. Mid-50s, winter parka, snow dusted his shoulders. A face lined with care, eyes sharp, but weary, not the eyes of a predator, but of a man who's been carrying something heavy for years. He held up a hand before I could speak. "My name is Agent Michael Drake, U.S. Treasury Department, Special Assets Recovery Division." He opened his coat slightly to reveal a badge. The emblem glinted coldly in the lantern light. "I'm not here to arrest you or threaten you. I just want to talk." I didn't lower the poker. "You've been following me." Michael exhaled almost regretfully for a while. "Ever since the will was filed. We suspected there was more to this cabin and your father than it seemed." He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "Your father, Edward Sullivan, he was part of a classified operation during the Cold War. Money, gold, foreign assets, political operations that never saw daylight. He never took a penny for himself, but he also didn't return everything he found." I remained silent, the poker still in my grip. "He stored it," Drake continued, "protected it, hid it, and then left it to you. You know what's down there, don't you?" I stared at him. "That I know enough," I finally said, "and I know why he left it to me. Not to people like you." Drake's expression softened just slightly. He nodded, stepping toward the fire, rubbing his hands for warmth. He knew what this country was capable of, just as he knew what it was willing to ignore. He kept this off the books because he wanted his conscience, not his career, to drive his future. He turned toward me. "But here's the problem, Mark. Keeping secrets doesn't stop the consequences. Someone always comes looking." Drake reached into his pocket. For a moment, I thought he was reaching for a gun and my grip tightened on the poker. But instead, he pulled out a compass. Not mine, but nearly identical. He held it delicately as if it were a relic. "This belonged to your father. He left it at a field office in 1991 after testifying unofficially about what he found. I think he meant for me to keep it until now." He placed it gently on the table beside the dying lantern. "I'm not here to take the gold or the documents. I'm here to make sure you don't end up dead over something you didn't even steal." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you want?" I asked. Drake's voice grew quieter. "The people who originally owned that gold, the power brokers, they're still out there and they're watching. You're standing on a fault line. If you try to handle this alone, it won't end well." He stepped closer. "But if you help me, if we bring this into the light on our terms, it could change everything. Not just for you. For hundreds of people who never got justice." I lowered the poker, but inside me something deep and old stirred. A mix of fear, anger, and something else. "Purpose, give me time," I said. "One night, then come back." Drake nodded, took one last look around, then turned for the door. "I'll be back in 24 hours, he said. "Don't disappear." The moment the door shut behind him, the storm outside exploded. Snow and wind blasting against the cabin like the world itself was trying to erase this moment in time. I stood there staring at the compass he left behind. Two of them now, both pointing in different directions, and I realized I had a choice. Keep hiding the truth or let it break the world open. The storm raged outside, but my mind was louder. Wind slammed against the cabin walls, rattling the windows like a prisoner desperate to escape. It was the kind of night when time seemed to slow or stop altogether. A night meant for reckoning. I sat at the old wooden table with two compasses before me. My father's and the one Agent Drake left behind. Both needles pointed differently. Neither showed true north, just like the truth. The ledger from the vault lay open in front of me. Its pages stiff, brittle, and full of secrets that weren't supposed to survive foreign bank transfers, offshore accounts, crates labeled with government seals from countries that no longer existed. A list of names, some crossed out, some marked with question marks. It was enough evidence to sink half a dozen empires, enough to start wars, enough to end them, too, if someone had the courage to shine a light. But as I looked at it all, I wasn't thinking about war. I was thinking about my father. A memory surfaced, warm and sudden, like walking into sunlight after a long night. Flashback fall 1974. Dad and I sat beside a creek behind the cabin upstate, back when it still felt like home. I was 15, the maple leaves around us burned red and orange. I just failed a math test. Disappointed in myself, embarrassed. Dad had said nothing for a long time. Then he pulled a small leather-bound book from his coat pocket, worn at the edges. "You know what this is?" he asked. I shook my head. "It's a ledger," he said, flipping the pages gently. "Not the kind banks use, the kind honest men do. Not to count what they earn, but to remember what they owe." I met his eyes. "What do you owe, Dad?" He smiled a tired smile, like the truth had become too heavy for him alone. "That's the thing, son. Sometimes it's not money you owe. It's the truth." That night came rushing back with the weight of stone. I knew what I had to do. Not because I was virtuous. Not because I wanted revenge on Adam or Claire, or even to prove something to people who thought I was invisible. But because my father trusted me, and trust demands action, I reached into the ledger, tore a blank page, and began to write. "To whom it may concern, no too cold, too distant." I started again. "To those who believe the truth deserves daylight instead of dust. What lies beneath this cabin was never meant to be hoarded or hidden. It's not treasure. It's testimony." My father was given the kind of truth that could destroy lives or rebuild them. He chose to protect it until someone could carry it forward. That someone is me. This ledger contains a ghost of deals that should never have been made, fortunes that were stolen, and lives that were left in the margins of history. I am not the thief. I am the witness. And tomorrow morning, I intend to open the door and show the world what's been left in the dark for far too long. If this is the last thing I ever do, then let it be enough. Mark Sullivan. I folded the page and slid it into the front of the ledger. The letter to Claire, still in the pocket of my coat, felt different now, lighter. It wasn't a plea, it was closure. Then I stood, gathered every crate, every folder, every photo from the vault, and carried them into the main room. The cabin groaned beneath the weight, not of objects, but of truth. By dawn, snow was beginning to soften. The storm was fading, but the real tempest was just beginning. A convoy arrived, not with guns drawn, but cameras, microphones, and trembling curiosity. Local news, journalists, a few gay-haired men in heavy coats, a pastor, a lawyer, veterans. Someone had tipped them off. Michael Drake stood at the front with his gloved hands in his pockets, watching me with something like respect or maybe sadness. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, and with a single motion I lifted the ledger, heavy now but right, and stepped outside into the light. The air was sharp, cold but clear as I stepped out of the cabin. The old ledger cradled against my chest like a fragile child. The sky was still waking up. Streaks of pale gold slicing through the horizon, setting the snow-covered trees ablaze with morning light. For the first time since I'd arrived, the cabin didn't look like a burden. It looked like a witness. A few dozen people stood in a semicircle outside. Reporters, photographers, documentarians, local activists, and a handful of veterans with American flag patches on their coats. Their breath fogged the air, but you could feel the heat of urgency rising from them like steam. The truth was here. Finally, Michael Drake stood at the front of the group, arms folded, watching me, not as a threat, but as someone waiting for judgment. He gave me a single nod. "The kind you only give someone who's carrying more than they were ever meant to, Mr. Sullivan," a woman said, stepping forward with a microphone. Her voice trembled with something that wasn't fear. "Why did you call us here? What's really in that cabin?" I stepped up onto the first of the cabin's wooden stairs, the ones my father had hammered into place long before I was born. I turned and looked at them all. Then I held up the ledger. "The truth," I said. "All of it." I took a breath. The kind that comes before a leap. For decades, this world has been held hostage by what's kept in the shadows. Money, secrets, power. My father didn't steal anything. He protected it. Not for a government. Not for a corporation. Not even for me. I opened the ledger, its pages rustling in the cold air. "This is proof of what got lost in war and in Greek gold, bonds, unmarked transfers. Enough to move markets, enough to bury the innocent." A murmur rippled through the crowd. In 4 years, no one knew. No one talked. My father knew if he tried to expose this alone, he'd be silenced. So he hid it here in a broken cabin in the middle of nowhere. I paused, letting the pain and pride show in my voice. He didn't trust the powerful. He trusted me. A janitor, a veteran, a man people thought had nothing left. And I almost believed them. I held up the ledger again. But if you leave a man with nothing but the truth and he still stands, that's when he becomes dangerous. The cameras leaned in. Even the wind paused. "I'm not here to cash these gold bars. I'm not here to sell names. I'm here to show you what happens when a lifetime of silence is broken." A veteran in the crowd wiped his eyes. Another nodded solemnly, hat clutched to his chest. This gold will be divided publicly to the families of those who were robbed, to the nations that burned, and to the people who served this country believing in things that turned out to be lies. A beat not in the dark, not behind closed doors, but in the light, where it should have been all along. I handed the ledger to Drake. Do your job, I said, but don't let it disappear again. He nodded more deeply this time and passed the ledger to the waiting legal counsel. Then, one by one, the crates were brought out of the cabin, gold bars, stamp seals, military certificates signed by men who no longer existed. A piece of history resurfaced, and not just mine. Later that afternoon, after the last camera crew had gone, I stood alone near the cabin once more. The silence had returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not heavy and cold, but clean, cleansing. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the old compass, the dented one my father gave me. The needle, for the first time, pointed straight north. I turned toward the towering pines and smiled. Not because I was rich, not because I proved anyone wrong, but because I finally understood. Home isn't where you inherit something, it's where you redeem it. As I walked away from the cabin, my father's last riddle solved, I whispered into the wind. You were right, Dad. I found my way and I carried it into the light. If this story moved you, if you felt the betrayal, the justice or the redemption deep inside, please take a moment to hit like. It tells me this story mattered. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words don't just echo, they inspire the next story. And if you believe in stories that stand for truth, loyalty, and poetic justice, please subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell.